process, for example, certain mistakes took place. Whether we have properly restored, put the long for long, or whether we just kept with the short, or whether the double consonant put in the proper place or not. For example, I will give you an example. We have this word upacha in the manuscripts coming upacha. So this, sometimes the variants are given upacha, upacha, so these variants are found. Upacha may be very original in the Brahmi scripts when it is written. Upacha, these are very short forms. This short could be long, and also cha could be double consonant or single consonant. Let's say if we restore in this text, this from the earlier Brahmi scripts, the development of the symbolic system to new symbolic system, then we could say that the pa could be uppa, upacha could be uppacha, or even we can double this c or cha also. Then we say uppacha. And then if we take it uppacha, then Sanskrit we have this utpatya, having flown up. So it could be like uppatitva, like that. So then it's absolute form. Then again we have this palatalization process also. So with that also, upecha, there's a variant. So upecha also could be correct. So then we have Sanskrit upetya. So then having hum or something. So then both meanings are possible. So this kind of even when it comes to the context, proper context, where the words are used, sometimes context will not help us. In some cases, context will help, whether it's in the sense of flown up or so whether it's having come. So this need to be like carefully examined. So in other words, these kind of mistakes are there, but they could be restored using the commentary, using the, for example, the parallel versions in Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit or various other sources. So using or checking with them, we can discuss these minor things. In my opinion, these are not very serious because the whole text has been kept. There are various ways of this keeping the text. For example, we have Mahasuttas, like Mahaparinibbana Sutta. Then at the same time, we have Chula Suttas too. Right? Even though sometimes the translations are wrong, for example, we have this Mahaparinibbana Sutta translated as the discourse on great disease, sort of great death or something. But because the Maha means they are sort of big, because we have Chula also, the small suttas also. So, for example, we have stop passages too. So then this also in the recitation process, I think they have kept well. So I think if you examine the stop passages, what we identify as sort of, for example, Four Noble Truths are explained everywhere the same. Panchakhanda is explained everywhere the same. Anicca is explained everywhere the same. Sankhara explained everywhere the same. So throughout these texts, these stop passages, they were well kept. So only these stories and sort of not very serious things. So there are certain mistakes are coming up. So in other words, I think when it comes to the canonical text, I think in particular in Pali canonical text, so we could see, compared with these comparative studies, we could see in that process, mostly these texts were well kept, and the transmission actually took place in a better way, sort of in other protecting and preserving. Why? Because the oral traditions also continued side by side with the written. If we had to depend on the written only, I think then things will go wrong with this transmission. For example, so the text came from Sri Lanka to the Southeast Asian countries, like Myanmar and so forth. So then here we see, even yesterday when I was listening to this recitation only, then I think the recitation process, I couldn't figure out what these words mean, because from my understanding, they are wrongly pronounced, some of the words. But if we had the text, actually the text that they have preserved is okay, but when it comes to pronunciation, I think I cannot follow, because it's I think Mangala, Mingala, or something like that.
No,
So,
even Sasana,
yeah.
when they pronounce it, it is Tatan.
Yeah, so,
The
yeah, like that.
translation
So,
is also
yes. Yeah, so, yeah, but my point is, like, because we kept both together, I think that is why these texts are well preserved. Otherwise, if we just depend on only one, I think things will be totally wrong. Now, I think I'm very optimistic about this canonical part because they are well preserved because of this combining process and communal recitation and all this. Not only just this text only.
Okay, thank you. I think the point that you make is that the transmission, the quality of transmission to Sri Lanka, the Pali canon has been much better, which is understandable, of course, for several reasons, for several factors. When you translate to Tibetan or Chinese or to other languages, it's much, also culturally they are somewhat more further away from Indian subcontinent's culture. So we could immediately conceive or imagine why it's in a better shape. Now I would like to give it to Professor Saito.
Yes, based on previous discussions, and also in order to encourage discussions from the floor, I think it's better to classify the meaning of transmission. So transmission, of course, Buddhism itself has long been transmitted through, they say the three directions, from India to so-called South India to Southeast Asia, basically based on Pali. And nowadays, of course, translated again to Sinhala and also some, Southeast Asian languages. And also the second direction is through Central Asia to China, and again to East Asia, including Korea and Japan and Vietnam as well. And also the third direction is, as you know, so through Nepal and through Kashmir to Tibet. Then again to Mongol and also Bhutan. So basically the translation should be called classical translation into Chinese and also Tibetan. That this is very radical translation, though content has been kept. Yes, but that is the basic. And again, nowadays, not only three directions, also to Europe and America, based on either from say Chinese tradition or Tibetan, and or Southeast Asian or Sinhala. But anyhow, so nowadays four directions can be at least kept in mind. Also, in terms of translation, classical translations and also the modern should be rather be divided. Yeah. And also one comment on your point about Dachompa. Yeah. Arhat translation is as you know. So Dajoro Monipa also explained. Yeah? And also maybe misunderstood as Ari, I wouldn't say misunderstanding. Ari and Han. Yeah? Da, Ari, and Han is to kill or conquer. So that's why Dachompa, the translation word was, adopted based on Indian tradition, Indian commentarial translation. As far as I remember, it is Haribhadra's Aloka. So like that, Tibetan translation is very faithful to Indian tradition. It shows that like that. Is that correct?
I cannot agree less.
Chomdende as well. Yes, it is also explained. It was explained by Aloka and sometimes Vyakya Yukti, and also sometimes Yashomitra. So they always try to base their translation on Indian tradition, commentarial and either it is commentary or the Shastra.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's true that the Tibetans at least made an attempt, let us put it this way. It's, again, to say how successful they were, it's not up to the Tibetans to judge, but they at least made an attempt whenever to try to find Indian sources for any idea or term or understanding that they, but of course sometimes they didn't manage, but sometimes they did, or most of the time they did. So I think we have to see it more in a nuanced, differentiated way. And what Professor Saito now suggests, I think we should bear in mind that we should perhaps periodize the types of transmission in classical period or a classical type of transmission, and then modern.
Yeah.
And the classical, now I understood, if I please correct me, like to South Asia, like, and from onwards, and then to Tibet, via Kashmir. China first. yes, China, and then and to yeah. Yes. So these are supposed to be called classical.
Yes.
But then the modern is, of course, now is going in different directions, right? I mean, to Europe and so on. So we should bear these phases of and types and phases of transmission. This is what I understood from you. And also with regard to the necessity of oral transmission, it's also misunderstood. Also with regard to the Tibetan tradition, people want to emphasize the orality in favor of the textuality. But again, this is a kind of a little bit not so differentiated kind of a stance, because in the Tibetan case, the textual continuity is a presupposition for any oral transmission. So you cannot have an oral transmission, just oral, although there are very few tantric, esoteric kind of a thing, contexts. But usually, when you say oral transmission, I have to have a text, otherwise there is no oral transmission. But there is also a text without oral transmission. So this has to be differentiated in the Tibetan context. So some comments on the floor, so please, you're welcome.
Thank you, Chairman, for your kindness. Well, I was just trying to understand rightly the meaning of translation, because it takes time for me to understand. Now, see the transmission in Indian context. There has been transmission of text in India. Take, for example, a text like the Rig Veda, for example. The Rig Veda has come down to us today without loss of a syllable. Transmission. Now, this transmission, so transmission of a text, as I was telling yesterday, the text has two aspects. Text has a form and text has a content. Now, transmission of a form, the very attempt to transmit the form has given rise to a number of scientific disciplines in India. For example, the science of phonetics emerged. What has been incorporated in modern linguistics, for example, is a contribution of this tradition. So linguistics got science of phonetics, which is a contribution of this tradition of transmission of form of a text. This is the contribution. So transmission of a form, then transmission of content, because there came the question of application. I was very happy that Sri Lankan professors pointed out to this fact, that text for what? Why should we transmit a text? Why should we give to the next generation the same text? What for? For application. So for application, if the text is to be provided, then application where? All these are taken into account in the tradition. So if you have to decode the text now, the question of is that its meaning is important, becomes important. So one side, the form is to be provided from generation to generation in the same pure form, but not for preserving the form only. It's for application. An application through understanding the meaning of the form. And there again, a number of attempts were made, and again systems of knowledge emerged. Right from etymology, as you are referring to. Now, for example, our tradition divided the language. Language has got 4 types of forms: yogica, etymological; rudha, conventional; yoga rudha, though can act, but it is used in the form of rudha, conventional; yogika rudha, where both can be used in both contexts. But meaning of all the 4 types of forms should be decided only on the basis of usage. So the criterion is that if it is used in this form, so these are the four possibilities conceptualized, and then interpretation of the text which has been transmitted from one generation to the next generation has to be. I believe the transmission, if it is transmission, is maybe transmission of the form and the transmission of the content. The transmission of the form, as rightly said in the practice, is oral tradition. Now these are, we say oral or written, these are modes. So transmission of form will have a particular mode, you know, that Padapatha, they started transmitting the form. And that has to be done in a very systematic form, systematic way. And so different techniques of transmission evolve. So Padapatha, Kramapatha, and then this all, then again Vikriti Patha. There are 8 varieties of Vikriti Patha. So different techniques were developed to transmit the form as it is. But that was not the purpose for only to transmit the form. Purpose was to make use of the form. And for that, the content part became very important. And how to decode that content part from the form. And for that, different steps. I was interested to know that when these Buddha Vachanas had gone from this place to another place, whether any such attempt in the tradition was made to preserve the form and to have something like this that has contributed. Translation is another mode of translation. You see? Now, even in the common life, the transmission might have missed. And so that has given birth to a different forms of, let us say, Buddhism. So, these are, language is another mode. So Chinese may be another mode of transmission. Tibetan may be another mode of transmission. This is how I to understand the idea of transmission. Am I correct or not? Please.
Thank you very much. I think points taken by everyone. And also, I think just to add, specific to the question whether there's some, I think at least from the Tibetan tradition, I can tell that there is a so-called exegetical methods, very complicated, sophisticated exegetical methods. Of course, one way of means of transmission was also interpretation and how you explain, explication is. Because if you just translate a text, even after having understood it, maybe the readers may not understand. So there was an attempt to devise certain...
That was taken care of by Purva Mimamsa here.
So in the Tibetan context, they are very specific, depending on the system, genre, not only depending on the topic, on the genre, on the vehicle, depending on Shalakayana, Bodhisattvayana or Vajrayana. There are different sort of modes of explanation and explication so that people do not misunderstand or misinterpret. So there are certain techniques, but we cannot go into the details. But you wanted to respond.
Thank you very much. Professor Jha has made a very good point regarding the transmission in the case of Vedic texts and the care they used to take to preserve the text. It is perhaps a unique device in India that the Vedic texts have come down to us during the maybe last 5,000 years, and every attempt has been made to preserve the words, the letters, even the accent. Although there was a tradition of copying the manuscripts, the written text had no much value. The more emphasis was laid on the oral transmission of the text, particularly some Vedic shakhas like Rigveda and maybe Krishna Yajurveda. And as we know, it is said in the Nirukta that one who recites the mantra, the Veda, without understanding the meaning, is just as good as a draft animal carrying a load. But unfortunately, what happened Unfortunately, what happened? Our great reciters continued to recite the Vedas without understanding the meaning. And even this very mantra from Rigveda, they would recite without understanding the meaning. So much care was taken to preserve the text but not the meaning. And perhaps it is. No.